how do you think about the role of technology in realizing inclusive smart society, or I don't know, like pros and cons, or positive and negative perspectives?
So the technology, I think the tool of technology, as we saw yesterday in some of the demonstrations, is opens up worlds for students. But I do think that we have to be thoughtful, and we have to be understand that maybe that's not every student's best way of learning, and also we have to understand with big, large experiences like that, you can lose students, right? So how do you make sure that you are attending to those needs of students in those spaces?
So technology sometimes really, well, of course, technology allows us to live in a convenient world, but also it sometimes made us to rethink our basic assumptions in our society. Then I think we need to think about our understanding of it. And this kind of question is not something that technology will answer, because we, like human, needs to determine how we construct the social structure.
And so how are words and concepts, how do they create more inclusive environments, and how might they restrict inclusivity? I think we need to think about that too. And that plays out in whatever we design in terms of an education course, whether that's face-to-face, hybrid, or online. Who's receiving these messages? You said earlier, it really comes down to communication, right? So especially if we're developing courses across cultures. So then how do we think about the words we're using, the value systems we're using, the concepts that we're using, and how they translate to cultures?
Yeah, like you mentioned inclusiveness or inclusivity, and I think this is really interesting because we may sometimes uncritically use the word of inclusiveness or inclusivity, but why do we need to think about it? I think this is really important question to think, because we may sometimes think that, oh, this is too obvious, but if we take something as too obvious, we may not think about it really carefully. I think this is really important to think about inclusiveness, who to include, why do we think about inclusiveness in the first place, or like what kind of world do we envision after including or including the concept of inclusiveness. I think this is good.
So let me ask you then, why do we need to think about inclusivity?
Oh, this is something that I wanted to ask you.
I got you first.
Okay, that's good. Okay, I think, well, I don't know, this may be just a kind of textbook answer, but like my understanding is that society is just diverse. Society is just diverse. I think this is a reason. And I think this is related to individual, because you mentioned humanity. When you talk about humanity, you mentioned individuals. And I think this is really important, because even if someone is educated in exactly the same situation, same school, same parents, well, let's think about a twin, right? Twins who are raised by the same parents, and they go to the same school, but still, they can be different, right? I think what this really indicates is that human is just diverse. So we can't comprehend every single thing with, this person is this, person is this, other person. So it's really easy for us to kind of label, some people, like group some people. And I don't want to kind of criticize this kind of attempt, because this makes sense. Because without grouping people, it's really difficult to identify every single person. Because like we do have just so many people around the world. It is efficient to group people. But at the same time, we need to miss so many things when we group people. Then I think this is one reason why we need to be aware that human is diverse by nature, right? So it's really difficult to just think about excluding things. So I think it's really important to include many people or concepts. Then by doing that, we may need to rethink. Can we include, or sometimes can we be tolerant to some ideas or these kind of things? I think this question itself is really important. I personally think that inclusiveness is important, but I want to open discussion to anyone who is interested in the concept of inclusiveness. This doesn't mean that those people who are supporting the idea of inclusiveness, because I think I need to talk to someone who is critical to the idea of inclusiveness so that we can exchange our ideas. And I think my understanding is based on the path that I just walked through for my life. So maybe for different people, for different reasons, they may be critical to inclusiveness. Then I want to listen to that. Then I want to expand my ideas about it. How about you?
Well, I was just going to say, given that, might we ask our students?
Yes, please.
Yes. So let's just ask what are your thoughts about the purpose of inclusivity? Do you have any? Yeah.
So I'm also of the belief that inclusiveness is really, sorry, I'll speak a bit louder.
Yeah.
Inclusiveness is really important in like society as a whole because of the diversity in humans. And I think if you did try to make humans more similar, to like teach them the same things, force their personalities down into a square, it would be really harmful to society as a whole in terms of progressing humanity. Because if everyone's the exact same way, everyone thinks the same, you don't get any new ideas, you don't get any innovation, you don't get any uniqueness. And if that happens, like you stagnate. And once you stagnate, like as the world progresses, if humans stagnate, you probably run into many more problems that are unforeseeable for us in the future.
Other?
I work in 2 labs. One is more predominantly white male, and there's 2 women of color. And then I work in a women's lab where we seek out not only, it's majority women, and then also students from different educational backgrounds, not only just exercise science. And I think it shows like the difference just in the meetings we have and the ideas that come forward and different ways that we can interpret our work and impact. In one lab, we are doing work that's for the general population, looking at things that will impact diabetes, things like that. But the minds who are looking at how to translate that work are only seeing it one way into one population. And it may not even be the population that necessarily needs that work. But in my other lab, I will think of a problem one way and think this is a solution. And then my student in public health or nutrition will explain to me how it could impact in several other ways. And I think sometimes you don't even know what you're missing out on, like Andy mentioned, by not having the people there. But I also think it's hard right now in the climate of America because like the word inclusion kind of rings alarms. So it's hard to see the path forward right now, even to do things in that space.
Yeah, good point. That's excellent. Anybody else?
May I?
No.
Yes, absolutely.
I would like to, in an ideal world, we shouldn't need the term inclusion. We shouldn't. Everyone should be able to represent themselves in the way they want, diversity of thought. Like, we shouldn't need inclusion. Unfortunately, we don't live in an ideal world. But if we did, we shouldn't need the term inclusion.
Well, let me ask. So, in that ideal world, what does education look like? How do we then think about an education where it is a given that we are addressing everybody's needs? So what does that look like?
The child or the student is at the center of the education, and we educate to their needs. We educate to allow them to engage in society in a way that is meaningful to them and how they want to engage. And I realize that is putting a lot more emphasis on teachers, but the child or the student has to be the center. And we educate that person, and we educate educate them. It's not a standard, here's what we're going to do, everyone's going to learn the same way, everyone's going to do the same curriculum. Again, this is in an ideal world.
That's okay, that's what we're shooting for, right? So thinking about that, then that introduces concepts of understanding and empathy and thinking about these different cultural spaces that students come from and these different needs that students have. And then thinking about how it is that we as teachers or trained teachers to actually be in that empathetic space. So that becomes a different chart. That becomes the work that we should be doing so that we can get to the idea.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. That's good. Like we are discussing about kind of ideal world, and also like we need to be aware of kind of reality, you know. And I think that both of them are really important because if we just think about reality, just explaining what happened. All right, okay. Well, it's important. Okay, it's important to understand what the reality is and also like how the reality is the reality. But still, at the same time, we also need to think about how to, well, if we do witness some kind of issue, then like how to overcome it, how to solve them. Then I think in order to think about ideal, like what is your ideal is another important thing. And well, I think especially related to ideal, I think it's even tougher. The reason is that we may have different ideals. Well, like if we can share the same ideal, that would be good. But like, but another question is, if we share the same ideal, is this ideal? This is kind of, this is kind of interesting question.
Yeah.
Then like, I think we need to, maybe then we come back to the discussion of the differences, maybe. Because we may have a kind of shared ideals, but also different, different ideals. And I think in relation to that, I think it's tolerance or, open to different possibilities is really important.
Well, this is where I teach politics today, right? So, and you and I had talked about whether or not politics belong in education. And I argue that politics is education, right? So, because if we are charged with educating all students from every walk of life, then we're also charged with taking in and understanding all the different values systems that actually compete against each other. And so that's where it becomes political, right? And so I think you're absolutely right to think that one person's imagined ideal is maybe very different than another person's imagined ideal. But I do like the idea of thinking about students at the center and really focusing on the needs of that student in terms of an educative space. But certainly you're going to have to think about what all the values that are playing a role in that child's life.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, actually, bell rings now.
So we're
yeah.
just getting into it.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.